Good afternoon, everyone. How are y'all doing today? I wore, early spring clothes leaving this morning when it was cool, and I've been sweating ever since. But it's just that time of year. Thank you all for coming out tonight. My name's Tom Chapman. I'm the executive director for the Albemarle-Charlottesville Historical Society. We're very happy to have this panel discussion. We're very happy to have the Center at Belvedere, who's a great partner with us. We also want to thank the City of Charlottesville Historic Resources Committee for co-sponsoring this program, and also for those joining us on Facebook. We live in that world where we connected to the online community, so we have a little camera here and what we affectionately call the squirrel. And also we have the folks on Facebook. The man behind the screen, Sterling, is managing that. So thank you for the Facebook folks joining us. At the end of this program, we'll have time for Q&A. So if you have questions as the presentation goes on, please keep them in mind and we can add them later. Especially for the Facebook folks, you can add them through the comments. So a few announcements before I get started with some dates. Coming up in April and May, we're going to kick off our historic tours, downtown historic tours. We've been working in collaboration with the Friends of Downtown Charlottesville. We have two tours, Black Barbers of Seville and the Innovation Tour, or Innovation Comes to Seville Tour. So we will have those out on Eventbrite. There's information in your newsletters that are on your seat. And you can sign up for those when we open them up, probably later this week, early next. And we also have one new tour, Charlottesville's Jewish History Tour with Phyllis Leffler. And I'm going to introduce Phyllis in a little bit so you can ask her about the tour if you want. So that's a new one that'll also be in the mix. So look forward to those. Also coming up this summer, we'll have Beloved Community Seville and their new Beloved Community virtual tour, that if you check them out online, there's a link in the newsletter in the calendar section that you can look at those. We're going to talk to them about the work they're doing on those virtual tours. And then we're also going to have a discussion with the Friends of Charlottesville Downtown that we've been working very closely with on all things downtown Charlottesville, trying to infuse the history into what they do. And then coming up in the fall, we have a special exhibit of the art of Alice Ivory. And that'll be at the Jefferson School in partnership with the African American Heritage Center. So look for more information about that come the fall. And before we get into the program, I'd like to introduce Phyllis Leffler, the president of the Albemarle-Charlottesville Historical Society. Thank you very much, Phyllis. And if you could stand up here, Phyllis. Yes.
I guess I need to talk into the mic for the people out there.
You can be right in the middle there, that'll work.
Okay. So welcome everybody. It's great to see you all here. And I'm not going to take a lot of time, but I just wanted to say that in my humble opinion, the Albemarle-Charlottesville Historical Society is really beginning to play a major role in this community. Our programs are full. We get 50 to 70 to 100 more people at every program, so the word is out there about the good work we're doing in this community. We have so much going on that sometimes we're breathless in terms of trying to pull it all off. So we have 4 wonderful interns coming to the Historical Society this summer. UVA students who just take on projects that we're trying to do and really move us incredibly far forward in all of that, so we're excited about that. We're launching a project on the economic and social history of the Browns Cove area. We're continuing to build our No Playbook project. We're continuing to work on this Francis Brand collection and potentially put the materials together in a way that people will really be able to access them much much more thoroughly. Tom's talked about the walking tours and the exhibit, and you understand why I say we're breathless. We do this with 2 full-time staff members. That's it. So we are sort of, there they are. Yeah, right.
Both.
All right, both. and all kinds of volunteers, some of whom are here today. So thank you to all those of you who are helping us either with our library collections or otherwise. If you're interested in volunteering, we're interested in hearing from you. And we are interested in whatever support you can give us, because our goal is really to be able to bring more people onto the staff so that we can build out these programs even further. So if you're not a member, please consider joining as a member, and if you are a member, please consider another donation, because we will really put your funds to good work. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Phyllis. So as I said, I'm Tom Chapman, Executive Director, the wizard behind Facebook, Sterling Howell, Programs Manager. We're always thankful for the Center at Belvedere with their work, and thank them for having us. So tonight, we're bringing you a panel discussion that is a bridge between important local history and also current events, and how we can understand the 2 of those together. We're proud to be joined by a very interesting and very cool panel of folks. I'm going to introduce them really quickly. Ben Ford, I've always known him as Ben Ford, is the principal and owner of the cultural resource management firm Rivanna Archaeological Services, located in Charlottesville. They have done a significant amount of historical and archaeological research throughout Charlottesville, Albemarle, UVA, Central Virginia. Almost 25 years of experience, so we're happy to have Ben here. Next to him is Jake Calhoun, who is a PhD candidate in the UVA's Department of History and Research, and a research assistant for the Memory Project, and Bethany Bell, who is a master's student in UVA's Department of History, and also a research assistant for the Memory Project. And up here we have Jalane Schmidt, who is director of the Memory Project at the UVA Karsh Institute of Democracy, and also associate professor of religious studies. She is a scholar and an activist in Charlottesville, Virginia, plans and leads public history events focused on Civil War memory, Jim Crow, and local African American history. And we have one panelist who is running late, Jeff Werner, who is our City of Charlottesville Historic Preservation and Design Planner, has over 25 years of experience in land use and historic preservation planning, policy, and projects, locally and on a statewide level, and more than 12 years experience as a project manager in construction and historic preservation. So he's going to be sneaking in and joining us in a little bit, so make sure you stare at him when he comes in. But otherwise, we're going to flip things around a little bit, but you probably won't even notice. So let me introduce Ben Ford, who will be talking to us about the recent archaeological investigations in historic Court Square. Some Swan Tavern and McKee Block, really interesting information. So thank you, Ben.
All right. So left, right, yeah. Thank you to Phyllis, Tom, Sterling. Thank you for organizing this, and thank you to the center, and thanks to all of you for having me here today. I did want to note 2 things before I proceed into my presentation. I'll be talking about 2 projects tonight, the Swan Tavern and McKee Block projects that we have initiated in 2023 and are trying to finish up furiously this coming year. So the research I'll be discussing tonight are both works in progress, but in particular I wanted to note that countless hours of labor, not only from myself and our staff, but also numerous volunteers who assisted us during field work and lab work particularly Monticello Archaeology Department staff, Archaeological Society volunteers. Really is a collaborative effort to pull this work together. And we will be finishing up both the Swan Tavern project probably later this, in the late summer, and the McKee block in the middle of the summer. So keep your eyes posted out. We will have final reports that hopefully will be made public at some point in time. So, without further ado, to orient everyone, the center of the screen is the blue outline Albemarle County Courthouse. To the right of the courthouse is the red outline area where we did our Swan Tavern research, archaeological research. And if you've been downtown in the past year, you know there's major construction going on the site there now. It's a city-county courts complex. And then to the left of the courthouse is currently Court Square Park, historically known as McKee Block, and that's another area where we have done non-invasive archaeological research, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But on either side of the courthouse, archaeological research ongoing. So very quick history. Many of you may know this, but I just wanted to provide this background. Albemarle County is established in 1744. The first courthouse for Albemarle County is located down by the James River, adjacent to what is now Scottsville, Virginia. As the Commonwealth expanded in population, large counties were divided up, and that was the case for Albemarle County in 1761. Portions of what we call Big Albemarle County were cleaved off to form Amherst and Buckingham County. And because of this, the new smaller Albemarle County needed a more centrally located court seat. And so in 1762, the General Assembly established the town of Charlottesville, 50-acre parcel, and then adjoining, but not part of the town of Charlottesville, adjoining it to the north was the 2-acre public square where the new courthouse would be constructed. So the growth of Charlottesville in the late 18th century was sporadic at best. One description in 1779 from a British prisoner of war described it as a courthouse, 1 tavern, and about a dozen houses. So downtown Charlottesville was nothing like we know it today. By about 1770, John Jewett Sr. Don't confuse the name Jewett with Jack Jewett's ride from Louisa to Charlottesville. Jack Jewett Jr. Is John Jewett's son. So this is the senior John Jewett. In about 1770, he purchases a 100-acre parcel predominantly to the north and east of Charlottesville, downtown Charlottesville. And by about the mid-1770s, we don't have a precise date, but that's the time period we know when the Swan Tavern first becomes being mentioned. He establishes a tavern on the property. Adjacent to and east of the courthouse. And we know that this was the only tavern in town till about the mid to late 1790s. So he had quite the business, as you can imagine. Some events that happened at the tavern over the course of its tenure. The Virginia General Assembly met there in 1781 for several days. As we all know, because of the British invasion of Richmond, the General Assembly moved west to Charlottesville, and the tavern was literally the largest public space at that time in Charlottesville. So we have primary source manuscripts that show that John Jewett asked the General Assembly for reimbursement of the tavern being used as a meeting place for the General Assembly in 1781. It was also a prominent local landmark. As I mentioned, many of the locals met and dined there. Visitors stayed there. It was one of the only public places in town that visitors could stay. Enslaved African Americans lived and worked there, and over the years were sold in front of the public establishment. We do know that the Swan Tavern was demolished in about 1830, more or less, and so it had a life of about 60 years before the new structure replaced it, and that structure still stands today in Charlottesville. It's called the Redlands Club, if any of you know where that is, right next to the courthouse. So the purpose, why do we have archaeologists out there doing archaeological investigations on a proposed court square project? The county and the city became aware of the fact that there were oral history and secondary source manuscripts that identified the possibility that John Jewett could have been buried somewhere on his property in 1805 at his death. And so because the Swan Tavern site and the city-county courts complex was a very small part of his larger land holdings, they had to take that seriously. And so we proposed a research design that was aimed primarily to make sure that we were able to identify any burials on the property. And to be very clear, we did not find any burials, so there is no John Jewett, at least in the area where we looked. So the Swan Tavern is a very well-documented structure. You wouldn't think that because it's such an early structure, 1770s, but we turn to a number of records to help us flesh out what the property might look like. One of the more important records we use are Mutual Assurance Society declarations, essentially fire policies from the early 19th century. And indeed, Court Square was, Swan Tavern was insured 3 separate times over the course of the first and into the second quarter of the 19th century. This particular image shows the tavern there and some additions in the back, a kitchen structure, a smokehouse, and a stable. All of those structures were insured by the Mutual Assurance Society, and part of the insurance declarations that we see, they give a fairly detailed information about the size of the structure, the materials that were built, what materials was it constructed out of, and then general information on the location. This map is what I would call a sketch map, not to scale, but it does show general locations of the structures. And one of the more exciting, and in my opinion, interesting discoveries we made about the Swan Tavern is that it faced what is now East Jefferson Street. The courthouse would be right about here. Here's the public square. This is East Jefferson Street, and it's facing East Jefferson Street. I had just assumed that it would face the courthouse. You know, a lot of business coming from the court business as well. But it was clearly oriented towards East Jefferson, which I'm convinced was the earliest road coming into Charlottesville at that point in time, probably named Three Notch Road. Everyone has heard of that. So we proposed a 3-phased archaeological investigations that took place between January and April of 2023. The first phase was shovel test excavation, phase 1. That's excavating numerous shovel test pits, small 1.5 foot diameter holes on an imaginary grid throughout space. And then one of the ways which we identify cultural features in the landscape is to remove the topsoil, the top 10, 12 inches of soil to get down to our red Albemarle clay. That was the next phase. We worked with machines of clearing the soils in that area. And then the third phase was targeted excavation of cultural features that we'd identified. And that is very labor intensive, and that's where we had the most help from our volunteers. So over the course of 4 months, we identified a total of over 350 modern and historic features, including what we believe is evidence for 3 possible structures, a well on the site, numerous post holes and post molds, too many to count, and 2 possible privies. We also found what we believe are 2 trash middens, small, shallow holes where trash was deposited over time that are associated with the Swan Tavern, the life, the occupation, and the operation of the Swan Tavern. So this is what we look for as archaeologists. You'll see in the upper right, that's the machine-assisted clearing of the top 10 or 12 inches of topsoil. But we look for soil discolorations in the red Albemarle clay. This is a naturally occurring red clay here. This one happens to be a very large rectangular feature, which we believe may be associated with the tavern itself. And then in the lower right, smaller shaped circular and square features, which are post holes in the landscape. In addition, I mentioned we found a well on the site. To the lower right is the image which shows it prior to excavation, and then partially excavated here in what we call profile, excavating only half of it. And then the top picture is part of a trash midden, a very shallow depression in the soil that was just chock full of artifacts that we believe were associated with the tavern. And then lastly, we found the brick remains of a very late 19th century residence, which we knew was going to be on the site. We know that from looking at insurance maps over time and researching the history of the property. So, artifacts. We recovered, and I've never been on a project where we've had this many, we've recovered between 24 and 25,000 artifacts from the Swan Tavern site, a reflection of its rich cultural history, but it's also a reflection of the integrity of the archaeological deposits, that they were not disturbed to a great deal over time. So a couple of photographs showing you shortly after we discover the objects what they look like. Some of them are covered in dirt, others less so. And then we need to process the artifacts. As archaeologists, we have to wash everything we find with a toothbrush, water, most things, and then catalog them. What is the artifact we are looking at? Is it a glass wine bottle, which dates from the late 18th century? Archaeologists have numerous typologies, chronological descriptions of artifacts, particularly ceramics, but also glass and nails and other things, which we use to date the features that we are excavating in. And many of the images here are ceramics, and archaeologists love ceramics. You'll have to ask Tom about that. One of our favorite artifacts, because they are so diagnostic. They can help us date the levels that we're excavating. So, Swan Tavern, as I mentioned, is one of the more artifact-rich sites that we have ever worked on. It also possesses an unusual level of integrity. The cultural features are intact, and it is a very well-preserved site. In my opinion, it could be a National Register nominated site from an archaeological site's perspective. So what next? We will be producing a report of findings, as I mentioned earlier. That report will be the record of what was found on the site. However, archaeologists also utilize historic context, history of the property. We look at the artifacts, we look at the cultural features, and we try and tell a story about the property, how it may have changed through time, and of course talk about the lives of the individuals who lived and worked there. One of the stories which I find fascinating is that of Adam T. Laws. Laws. Laws was an enslaved man owned by John Gillet, possibly his personal servant. Gillet freed Adam Laws in his 1805 will, but there was a stipulation that he would not become a free person for 10 years after his death. So in 1815, Adam Laws became a free person. He shows up in various records from individuals throughout town, including Thomas Jefferson. He sold fish to Thomas Jefferson. He also purchased an acre in town and either built or acquired a residence there. I believe that lot is near Water Street, so close into downtown. He was also, in 1816, charged with assaulting a prominent white merchant. And he married another free woman of color named Elizabeth or Betsy Barnett, and they had at least one child together. And shortly after his charge with assault, I think about 1818, he leaves Charlottesville. He leaves his wife and his child and moves to Washington, D.C. And Betsy Barnett stays here with their child. And I don't know why, but he establishes a new family in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. He did leave the house and the lot in Charlottesville to his wife. And then one of the last things we know about him is that he dies sometime between 1822 and 1825. And if you stand back and look at this, what a remarkable arc of life that Adam Laws had. And one of my things I want to do before we finally publish the report is to go up to DC and look into free black records up there and see what more I can find about Adam Laws to flesh out his story and the story of the Swan Tavern. All right, second site, McKee Block. McKee Block, just west of and adjacent to the courthouse. The McKee Block was not part of the original 1762 plan of Charlottesville. It first became available in a 1790 addition to the north of Charlottesville, which surprisingly was donated by John Gillet of our Swan Tavern. And it was contained in lot 58. That's just the number it was designated, and that lot was sold in 1793. And a street passed just to the east of McKee Block between it and the courthouse. If you go to Court Square Park today and you look at the landscape, there's really very little indication of the street that was there. But there was an informal road passing between the courthouse and the row of structures that made up McKee Block. A number of people have researched McKee Block over many years, and I stand on their shoulders about what I know about it. Some of the evidence that I was able to research myself, looking at Mutual Assurance Society declaration policies and deed records for each small parcel within McKee Block, we know that it was the first evidence for a structure in lot 58 is about 1804. Could have been earlier, but that's the first evidence we have for a structure on site there. And it was probably fully built out by about 1810. More than likely a desirable place to live and work because of the commerce and the social activity that went on at the courthouse. So it was a very dense development, about 7 or 8 structures on the property there, running north to south. We also know that McKee Block over time transitioned from a primary commercial center, in fact the only one in early Charlottesville, in the first few decades, to one of several commercial centers over time in the broader Charlottesville. It also transitioned from owner occupation to tenant occupation over time. And then also it transitioned from white-owned and occupied to black-owned and occupied by the late 19th century, and I'll get into that in just a bit. Many of the structures in McKee Block have mutual assurance policies as well, and that is a huge, rich resource of records for understanding the material remains of McKee Block. This particular structure is the old post office, one of the early post offices in Charlottesville. It would have been at the corner of 4th and East Jefferson, in the most southernmost structure in McKee Block. Some of you are probably very familiar with the trajectory of McKee Block. It began as a very vibrant commercial and residential space, developed through time. As I mentioned, over time, tenants supplanted owners, and by the very late 19th century, black residents replaced white residents. However, while black residency increased, black ownership did not. We only know of one documented black owner of a parcel in McKee Block, and that was John West, another fascinating story of a person. As I understand it, he was born into slavery. He was the son of Isabella Gibbons. Many of you may know of that name for her history at the University of Virginia and in education locally. And he inherited the estate of his wealthy adopted mother, who was Jane West. So John West purchased a parcel in McKee Block, I believe it was on the northern end, in 1894, and then he sold it in 1918, and he was essentially forced to sell. Picture in the lower right is McKee Block. I believe, while we may not have a precise date, turn of the century, maybe very early years of the 20th century, and an 1896 map of McKee Block and the courthouse. So, by 1820, totally different map. As you can see, the insurance map shows no structures there, reflecting the demolition of McKee, the residential and commercial structures, and then, of course, its transformation into a public park. So, it's my understanding that although the demolition of all the structures in McKee Block took place in 1919, it really can be argued that the inevitable demise as a predominantly African-American residential block began at least 5, if not a few years earlier, at least by 1914. Many of you know the story of Paul Goodloe McIntyre, who purchased all of the parcels through an agent, gifted the land to the city on the condition that it be turned into a park. All of the structures demolished. And of course, the subsequent erection of the Stonewall Jackson statue there. So, the city of Charlottesville hired our firm to investigate Court Square Park with a focus of determining if we could identify material remains of the structures below grade. We know they are no longer standing. What we don't know if there's anything left of it. Was demolition complete, 100%? Did they just level above grade and below grade portions are still there? We didn't know. So we brought on a local firm and worked collaboratively with NAVA Geophysics in late 2023. And we conducted a ground penetrating radar study of the entire park. And we're very successful. And ground penetrating radar shoots electromagnetic energy down into the ground, trying to identify both solid objects and disturbances in the soil. Yeah, big splash of color, right? I'll try and explain what we have here. This is one of many maps that were produced which identify the findings of the ground penetrating radar. The white outlines, squares and rectangles, are a early 20th century Sanborn map which shows where structures once stood, our best understanding. The blue and yellow and orange colors are readings from the ground penetrating radar. And we believe that we are able to identify some potential features below grade. area down here, area 1, looks like it fits fairly nicely with the known location of a structure which would have bounded 4th Street, possibly, since it's a solid object below grade, possibly a floor or basement level to that structure. Area 2, sort of a long, linear, lighter blue color. Right in there, we believe that may represent the rear walls of several structures that were built facing the courthouse. And at the top, another area which seems to conform nicely with at least one structure on the northern end. So we believe there are good candidates that we might want to go out and test. And that's the second phase of this field work. I mentioned that this is a work in progress. Probably in the next 4 to 5 weeks, we will be out on Court Square Park again, doing very limited archaeological investigation, probably in 1 or 2 of these locations, trying to document whether there are material remains below grade. So we have high hopes for this area, and we hope to be back out at Court Square in the next few weeks to ground truth. I believe I'm done, and I know this was a very quick review, but in our panel afterwards, we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Ben. Please let me introduce Professor Jalane Schmidt and Jeff Werner, who will talk a little bit with you.
Yeah, we're going to have Jeff go first. I apologize. I missed the 6 o'clock to 5 o'clock memo, so I raced here. And my job was to tee all of these folks up with some, try to orient you to Court Square spatially. So my apologies, but hopefully this will all make sense. I will say I've worked with Ben on quite a few things in the last couple of years. Some of the most extraordinary things I've ever been associated with. The Penn Park Cemetery, the graves that were out there, the work at Swan Tavern, which, by the way, so I'm staff for the Board of Architectural Review, and in reviewing the court project, one of the requests that the BAR made was to do an archaeological analysis, and the county wasn't too happy about it, but the results are extraordinary, and have been. And the which led us, when we were there, realizing things were just below the surface, got Ben and I talking about, well, what might be over on the other side of the courthouse at Court Square, at McKee Block, and that's when we did the GPR. It's an exciting site. At least we know it's intact. I don't know what we'll be able to do archaeologically there, but the opportunity's there. So with that, I'm going to try and I don't just push a button. Yeah. God. Oh, right. Yeah. Oh. So, just very quickly, all right, this is just not my day. That's all right, that's all right. Quickly, just to sort of lay out, and Ben talked about the early days of Charlottesville, and we called the Swan Tavern site Charlottesville Day One, because it was just, late 1700s, sort of the first things that were appearing in the town. And what's important to understand, and that's what I want to contextualize here, is Charlottesville's a tiny place. It started out as a tiny place, at least, and it was a tiny place for some time. So you see the green there, that's the Court Square area. This is from an 1877 map, similar to what Ben had showed. Again, we're talking about this area known as Court Square, just to get you oriented. You know number nothing, the courthouse, McKee Block, and the Swan Tavern, and to stress that the building that's there now is at the site of the Swan Tavern. It was not the Swan Tavern. This is the familiar map of the city of Charlottesville, a large area, but in the middle there, that's it. That's Charlottesville in 1818, and population 1,500. So a very small place, and most of it was concentrated in that corner we know as Court Square. And part of trying to explain it all is understanding things change. I mean, this is a photograph of the courthouse in 1912. If I didn't show what that was, most people wouldn't know what it was. So, we've seen changes in Court Square even, you know, in the 20th century. And so just try to illustrate that change, just get you oriented. You're looking to the northwest, there's the courthouse, Levy Building, Number Nothing, Swan Tavern, and so just envision this, but we're going to go back in time a bit, and I sketched this up. That's sort of why I was a little late, because just to sort of say, this is it. This is Court Square. That's, you know, I can't say precisely, but because some of the things weren't all there at the exact same time, but in the early 1800s, that was it. Swan Tavern down here was this predominant feature on the road into Charlottesville. Number Nothing was built maybe sometime 1820s. The second courthouse was the brick. It's the back building of the courthouse now. There was a jail. McKee Block was there. There were some buildings on the south side of Jefferson and on 6th Street. And what's really interesting is, and I've been trying to express, is to visualize this space. You know, Swan Tavern, the outbuildings, there was that shape that Ben had showed. The well was there, the structure in the back identified as a stable and a shed, but it may have been a dwelling, and if the indications are right, possibly a slave dwelling. So, you know, just now taking a step down, the other side of the courthouse, this is looking at Jefferson Street back towards High Street. The image will look familiar, but this is what it used to look like. That is the south end of McKee Block. And this is now, I'm at the High Street looking back towards the mall. So the courthouse is on my left. This is another undated image, but you know, the structures that were there. And then this standing looking sort of west across the park, the statue had been here. And so the structures that were McKee Block. So this was a significant place. You know, that's why it'd be interesting to know what's still in the ground there. This is a sketch, obviously, you know, looking at the courthouse from Jefferson Street, but just I tried to sort of say, all right, what would people have seen? So as Jalane's telling the story and what her students and what she's found, just to be able to understand and express this place three-dimensionally, that's what I hopefully I'm able to do here. And Ben talked about Swan Tavern site, talked about the McKee Block site. Yeah, it's fun being out on the site with the GPR guys because they go, there's something. And Ben and I are like, I don't know what they're looking at. It looks like a fish or something, you know. But lots of interesting things out there. One of the things that I've been doing, well, the Historic Resources Committee and Jalane and Tom are on that, is recently got approval from the state Department of Historic Resources. A marker will be placed at what's called Court Square Park now, and we wanted to communicate three key things. And one is there's, so to people to understand that Court Square, that area was where people were bought and sold. Enslaved individuals were sold numerous locations, not just one spot. And then those transactions were recorded in the courthouse, and they're still there. You can go and look at the deeds and see these transactions of humans. And the third thing we wanted to communicate was that these happen on what was called court day, and you knew when court day was coming. So you lived with this fear that when that day comes, something might change in my life. And that, again, what Jalane can express to you. So this is where, you know, this is not everything we wish to do, I think everything the city would like to do, but we're doing something to let folks know the story. And just, you know, going what we know, there's a series of ads from the 1820s through the 1860s, you know, at the Central Hotel, on the public square, at the Eagle Hotel, at Number Nothing. There's others that are in front of the courthouse, at Swan Tavern. So it's, you know, going back to that image of, you know, Court Square as this place, that these things were happening. It was happening throughout Court Square. Mr. Garnett's Tavern, which was next to the Eagle Tavern, also known as the hotel. Number Nothing, Swan Tavern, the courthouse, the public square, the Central Hotel, which I believe is the second building in McKee Block. So the point here is just sort of that as Jalane's talking, visualize this space. This is happening throughout this space. And, just an interesting thing in all the ads, again, talking about court day, it's there. All these ads, on court day, it's on court day. So it's a thing that people are very cognizant of, and painfully so. So that's a very, very quick hope at rendering visible the court square that we're going to talk about. And I'll leave that up, Jalane, if it helps. But I'm going to step away and thank you all for allowing me to.
Hi, thanks to the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society for organizing this event. Thank you to the center for hosting us, and to you, the audience, for being here. I'm Jalane Schmidt. I'm the director of the UVA Karsh Institute of Democracy Memory Project. And this work on the sales of enslaved people was spurred by the Blue Ribbon Commission on Race, Memorials, and Public Spaces. In 2016, as some of us may remember, a young Charlottesville high school student, Ziona Bryant, circulated a petition about removing Confederate statues, and this kick-started a community conversation, which occurred over a 6-month period of twice monthly public meetings. And we learned together in public, and sometimes it was challenging, but we learned more about Charlottesville's past and how race and place intertwine. So race, memorials, and public spaces. That's a really capacious cluster of topics to keep in mind as we consider the discussions that were generated by this Blue Ribbon Commission's 2016 work. And the debates over statues took up most of the airtime, but the Blue Ribbon Commission's final report that they offered to City Council actually made numerous recommendations around which there was broader community consensus. One was, just as an example, the Equal Justice Initiative Community Remembrance Project surrounding the 1898 lynching of John Henry James, and this was something which was highlighted by the 2018 Charlottesville Community Civil Rights Pilgrimage, which we pursued in 2018, and I see some folks here, I think, who were participants in that. The curriculum enhancement in public schools, that is teacher professional development and continuing to equip local educators with materials about local Black history for teaching in the classroom. And the Jefferson School has carried on this work with summer seminars for public school teachers. And then what we're going to talk about here today, which is amplifying recognition and marking the sales of enslaved people, who were the majority. I never get tired of saying this. The majority of the population here at the time of the Civil War were enslaved people, 52%. So really need more attention there. So, and our community members have been advocates for expanded public history and pressed City Council to move on various initiatives. And Charlottesville community members are really passionate about public history and civic engagement, and it's very gratifying, actually. It also keeps you on your toes. Folks are impatient. When is this going to happen, right? But that's great, And so there have been insistence upon memorializing has been taken on just by community volunteers and various acts of remembrance. There's one projected here. This is during Liberation and Freedom Day events sponsored by beloved community Seville. Vigil walks by descendants, remembering the words of enslaved people around Court Square. Weekly flowers that are provided by a local grocery store every week, that are placed by community members there at the Number Nothing building right here. A meditation group occasionally gathers there. There are, of course, historical walking tours and the like. So City Council tasked the Historical Resources Committee, which is a volunteer-appointed body, with studying this matter. And I wear two hats here. One is in my role as an appointee at the city's Historic Resources Committee, and the other as director of the UVA Karsh Institute of Democracy's Memory Project. And so we started holding meetings with descendants some of whom are here in the room with us, and others are listening on Facebook Live. And we started doing this in 2020, and then of course the pandemic hit, and we kind of pushed the pause button. I think a lot of us did, and a lot of initiatives. But then picked up again as we all kind of learned Zoom, right, and all this, and started having these meetings. And actually, fortunately, Zoom allowed us to pull in a wider group of descendants that might have been even possible in person. So the feedback that we heard from descendants was that there was a need for more information, and names and stories, and humanizing these people as people, and to have some, with the goal of having some sort of visible intervention in the physical landscape that memorializes their story. But first we need to excavate those stories. And so there was a need for more research. And when I began my work as director of the Memory Project, I sponsored a team of researchers. We're going to hear from them here today. Consultation with descendants has been key. Some of you folks know Nia Bates and Andrew Davenport and Justin Reed, who've worked with Monticello's Getting Word Project and Virginia Humanities, respectively. And for descendants, these are resources that what's being found by the team has been important resources potentially for genealogical work, for knitting together some of those broken links that were broken by these sales. So Dr. Gillet Rosenblith, who's with us here in the back here, who earned her PhD in history at UVA, has supervised this team of history graduate students for several years now as they've conducted their work. Medeja Leverett, who's since gone on to a PhD program at Johns Hopkins, Cassandra Hanna, who started a PhD program at Harvard in the fall, and presently Jake Calhoun, Katie Wu, and Bethany Bell. So I'm going to turn things over to Jake and Bethany to tell us what the research team has found.
Yep, that's not mine. I could try, it won't go well.
You can make it up.
There we go.
Gotcha.
Perfect.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
There you go.
Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Jay Calhoun, and I am a research assistant for the Memory Project. I have been working on this project and this research for about 2.5 to 3 years at this point. We've had a lot of people, I think, Jalane mentioned, come and go during that time, but this work wouldn't have been possible without a number of people who aren't here: Cassandra Hanna, Medeja Leverett, Katie Wu, and so me and Bethany are also indebted to them for this work. But yeah, I just want to kind of talk a bit about the research we've done and kind of our philosophy going into it. The first thing that we wanted to do when starting the research with Court Square was reach out to folks who had done this research before, because we were not the first people to research Court Square or enslavement at Court Square or anything along those lines. And we wanted to make sure whatever we were finding, we were adding to existing archives of knowledge, not just kind of redoing the same research over and over again. So we reached out to the community. We had invaluable assistance from folks, including like Jeff Werner at some point, and then I believe Sam Taller. I don't know if he's here today, but important folks who were able to really help us figure out where we could add. And one of the kind of collections of sources that hadn't really been gone into yet were the Chancery Order records. So I'll get into those in a minute, but first I want to talk about kind of, we mentioned Court Square, so there's numerous different spots and locations that slave trading happened at. And so, we kind of wanted to delve in and really focus our efforts where we could, because there's a lot to cover. And so we really kind of focused in on specifically the Chancery Order records, because they were the ones that had the most potential for stories. So what are Chancery Court records? They're essentially property court records. You can find them in the courthouse today, unless I think at some point they might be moved, so don't hold me to that. But what they essentially are property court records in which someone dies intestate without a will, or in which someone's will is being contested and it ends up going to the court. And oftentimes these are quibbles over property. So brothers trying to figure out, who gets what land, someone who put in their will to, give their widow this amount of land or money, but then the son wants some money, etc. So it goes to the court. And because it's over property and happening in the antebellum period, one of the most common forms of property was human beings, enslaved people. And so there was an issue for the court, which was, how do we divvy up property when it's a single human being, right? It's kind of like a King Solomon's problem, right? And so the answer is that often they would essentially use the commissioners of court. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Bethany Bell here for a bit, who's going to talk about some examples about how these commissioners of court and how the court really kind of approach this problem of property as human beings. And so, yeah, Bethany.
Thank you, Jake. So as Jake mentioned, I'm going to go through a few cases and really highlight the language that's used and talk about the information that we're trying to pull out, but also to kind of reinforce what's already been talked about, which is the court and other entities affiliated with the court and how they're all sort of coming together and are all sort of implicated in the sale of enslaved people in Albemarle County and Charlottesville. So this is an example of one case, Chapman versus Dunn, 1855. There's a lot of language here, but what we're looking for, and one of the things that jumps out to us, is not only the parts of the case that are dealing with the law, but also specifically the names of enslaved people who are being sold. So here those three people are Albert, Fanny, and Reuben. And the last sentence here talks about the slaves that are going to be sold in front of the courthouse of the county of Albemarle. So this is very explicit language that is describing a sale of enslaved people physically at or in front of the county courthouse. Some cases, many cases are like this, in which they have the names of enslaved people and specifically describe that they are being sold at the courthouse. Others are less explicit. Some of them don't have names. They might just mention slaves or less clear information, but they still indicate that the courthouse is involved in selling enslaved people. Oh, I was doing online. This is another case, Danielle versus Danielle, and as you can see, the top, it goes from 1837 to 1839. This is also a very common occurrence where you have a case that's going on for years and years, and so you see the same individuals crop up in multiple cases, sometimes across books, because the books contain a certain number of years. And so what you see here, again, your eyes are probably drawn to the list of enslaved people, but I'll also mention that they have here at the end that the sale is going to be advertised in local newspapers. So in addition to the courthouse as a physical place that is implicated in the sale of enslaved people, you also have the newspapers that are also involved. And I think someone mentioned that earlier, Jeff mentioned that earlier, right? So this is an event that people are coming to and are aware of, and often this language is built into the responsibility of whoever is responsible for the sale. They're supposed to be advertising it, and we've gone through and found some of those ads as well. On the right, you see this list of names of enslaved people, and you also see some family units being identified. That's important to us because it gives us clues about how we might pursue this research further, and it gives us tools that we can pass on to others who might want to pursue this research further. For example, the first name there is Lucinda, and in the court court document, it says Lucinda and her increase, indicating that Lucinda and any children that she might give birth to would be included in this suit, or in this case. And then you have Alice and Hannah on the next two lines, and then it's indicated that Hannah is in fact Alice's child. So what's interesting there is you actually see one dimension of this family unit staying together. Of course, that was not always the case, and frequently these cases involved family separation. So again, a lot of text, but I'll draw your eyes to kind of the highlighted portion here, which is talking about a case where the sheriff of Albemarle County is being told that if this individual does not pay what they're supposed to pay $300, that the sheriff is actually authorized to go and physically take possession of the enslaved people belonging to Anne Paris. And so what's interesting here is that you see, again, sort of a third entity that's involved. You've got the court as the physical site, you've got newspapers that are advertising the sale, you've got the law enforcement in Albemarle County also being involved in physically laying claim to individual people and bringing them to the courthouse in order to pay the debt of this individual. Okay. Back to you.
Yeah, so again, the real kind of, we had kind of two, I guess, almost arguments that emerged from our research. The first one was, as you kind of go through this, you realize that the court square is more than just, the court square site is just one segment of a much larger institutional network supporting the systematic practice of enslavement. So it wasn't just, we quickly realized, not just court square that was emerging in the records, right? There was a whole network of slave trading and human trafficking that was emergent throughout Charlottesville, and we kind of wanted to incorporate that into our research. So we kind of had to broaden our horizons from just court square, because court square is kind of like a node in like a larger network. And so, as we continue to do the research, we decided to kind of just catalog every mention of enslaved people and figure out like where they were, how the court was being involved. And so I'd like to talk real quick about one case in particular. This is Sarah Harris v. Edward H. Moon. It's from between 1834 and 1836. It's a long court case. For one of the court cases are all, kind of the orders are compiled into order books, and I believe this court case has like 40 pages collectively to it. It's a long, protracted court case. I won't get into the whole story, but at one point during it, they're trying to figure out how to divvy up property between the claimants. And so what they end up doing, the court, is ordering the sheriff, Francis B. Dyer, who's acting as a commissioner for the court, and ordering him to essentially go to the Viewmont estate or plantation and basically figure out how much wealth is there. So he's supposed to go and, quote, state and report to the court an account of the rents and profits of the lands and slaves of which late John Harris died, seized, et cetera. And so you kind of get the sense that they're actually, sending out a singular agent to go walk around a plantation, point to someone, and say, you are worth this amount of money. And that's exactly what he did. And so we have here the record of Francis B. Dyer's report on the enslaved population at the Viewmont estate. And importantly, we also have the names of those individuals, as well as the price he assigned them. And so we see that these court commissioners are going through assigning 6-year-olds the price of $150. And then essentially, bringing that back to the court, and the court is then divvying up some amount of this and figuring out how much money goes where. And again, sometimes in resolving these cases, individuals would either be, conferred to ownership of one person or another, but oftentimes, because that couldn't be done, they would all be sold at public auction at Court Square, and that money divvied up amongst the claimants, or apportioned however much the court saw fit. So this is really the central argument that kind of emerged in our research as we were doing this, was realizing that, the court is an active participant. The city of Charlottesville is kind of an active participant in this, or the county rather. And our research really showed how, whenever we think of courts and law, we think of kind of neutral arbiters, right? Like lawyers arguing to and for about, what should be done, but, it's not necessarily their own personal stake. But that's not really the case. In fact, the court was an active enslaver itself. They were choosing who to enslave, how much they were worth, et cetera. And so we really kind of want to emphasize that in our research as kind of our main takeaway of what we found. And in doing that, we've also wanted to kind of, while kind of constructing this argument, so to speak, and finding evidence for it, we also wanted to, make sure our research was useful for a wide variety of tools, again, that we're adding to some knowledge about slavery in Charlottesville and human trafficking in Charlottesville. And so that's kind of building on our current project, which is turning our information into a index and glossary. Bethany, do you want to tag team this? We can kind of talk about.
So this is.
Come over here so you can.
Oh, yes.
Microphone. Yeah.
You can see me. Gotta be visible to all the folks. So this is just representative of how we're trying to transform some of the information that you saw, which is pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of these court cases into a document, into a resource that can be used by specifically the descendants of enslaved communities here, but also potentially other groups as well. And so what's represented here is just a few pages from the first version that we've worked on. And some of those cases that you saw were basically translating them into a little bit of a key. So the cases that have lots of information, including the names of enslaved people, we've coded kind of in a particular way. Some that have less information, we've coded in a particular way. And then here at the end, you see another part of this document, which is any narratives that we've been able to tease out. So you might remember the name Lucinda from, I think, the 4th or 5th slide. And so this is more information about that individual that we were able to find. And so beyond just a name, beyond just a list of names of enslaved people, we're trying to also provide as much context for that person's life beyond just a name and a number that they would have been assigned as a part of a court case or a sale.
Yeah, and I would say that also as we've kind of like, this is one of the reasons we wanted to use the Chancery Court records in particular, because, well, you know, deed books and a lot of will books have records. The Chancery Court order records have that kind of place of sale mention. They have more of a story that we can kind of tease out and cross-reference with other sources like newspapers, et cetera, to really kind of, you know, piece together enslaved people's stories, which has been a major focus. And in terms of what we found, I mean, there's, you know, we have a certain number of like names that we've found over the course of all this. It's in the hundreds, but I don't like to always reference the numbers because the numbers we found are just a fraction. Because most people who were sold at Court Square, we don't have records of that because it was either sold for private ownership, it could be you know, quote unquote slave trading companies, et cetera, and we just don't always have access to those records. So what we have is a small snippet of the names of individuals sold. In fact, most of, I would say, maybe not most, maybe about half the cases that we have in which it mentions enslaved people being sold at Court Square, names aren't mentioned. They just say, you know, take quote unquote inventory of the slaves and, you know, sell at Court Square, et cetera. And so we have only a fraction of the names, but even that fraction is massive. So it gives you, again, Charlottesville was a pretty small town for most of its history, and yet there was so much trafficking that took place in it, which kind of speaks to, you know, what we hope this kind of index is going to, you know, contribute to and kind of illustrate that, you know, slavery was kind of an omnipresent institution in Charlottesville and Virginia. You couldn't escape it. It was everywhere, and Court Square was kind of the one center of it, and that's what we hope to show in this our research. Thank you. I think that's it. Yeah.
Turn the lights on, wake you up. Miss Rosenblith, you want to come down? We put you on the panel. I have your name on the panel. Jalane, you want to come up? And I'm going to actually ask, do you have a question? Gillet. Yeah, to kick the panel off. Did they miss anything? Did you have anything to add?
They never miss anything. They're incredible. I think, well, I'm more curious about what you're hoping to do with the information that you all have, because I don't know as much about yourself. I know about what they've done, so I will leave questions to other people. But I'm curious, kind of what you're hoping.
That doesn't work. Just speak up. I mean, we have no microphone in the room. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So what are you hoping to accomplish with your archaeological research?
Thank you. I hope to, first of all, we need to complete our contract and finish our report. That's utmost on my mind right now. But as I see it, the information on our archaeological work, and particularly on enslaved and free African Americans that we have come across in that project, will become a public document. And I'm already seeing collaboration written all over, you know, this presentation right now, and future discussions about what we found at Court Square, and we couldn't get into it in the 20-minute presentation, but we have done substantial amount of work on researching the property owners all the way back to the mid-18th century, for the Swan Tavern site and doing as much research as we could on enslaved individuals that they owned through time. So we have a good bit of information that we would certainly pass on to you. Some of it might be more useful than others, but yeah, it's my hope that the document we produce, which is now running close to 300 pages, will be a matter of public record and will be publicly available.
Well, any questions amongst the panel as you were kind of listening to each other?
Actually, I'm going to throw a question back in your court here for the two recent presenters. Have you compared the court order books with the Chancery Court manuscript cases themselves? And what we're referring to, the court order books that they were talking about are located in the county courthouse in the clerk's office, but there is a whole collection of the actual legal papers for those Chancery cases in the Library of Virginia in Richmond.
Yeah, so we have delved into that a little bit actually, because again, we have not done as much because we kind of been centering our efforts more in Charlottesville. Again, we're UVA grad students, so traveling to Richmond consistently was we could. But the Library of Virginia, we actually haven't been using their digitized records because a substantial number of them are digitized, and that's actually how we pieced together a couple of important narratives. One that comes to mind was I believe it was Lucinda, right? It was essentially someone who was enslaved by Alexander Garrett, who was one of those commissioners of court I was talking about, and also UVA's first bursar. And essentially, she was basically consistently fomenting rebellion on his plantation, essentially, which is now over on where South Street is, or what used to be where South Street is now. And so, yeah, we've been using those to piece together narratives. The issue is we wanted to use the order books because we also wanted to know kind of what happened to these individuals, and kind of like the final say in that, and also you can cover more ground. So it's one of the reasons, one of the documents we didn't go through as thoroughly were the minute books, which would be incredibly useful. But we wanted to make sure we could, again, get something done and get through the order books. Exactly, yeah. At some point you have to put a stop and be like, all right, let's,
Colin, you MC?
What's that?
Oh, gentleman had a hand up.
Yeah, I was just waiting. I mean, if the panel, I wanted to give the panel a chance to kind of talk to each other about what's just been presented. So if there's no more questions there.
Well, what time are you going to stop us?
We got about 15 minutes. But yeah, the gentleman.
I just, you have names and some dates, some names and some dates of when these individuals were going to be sold. Have you been able to find out through the records who purchased them and where they went?
So that we do not have. Sorry, speaking about Seal.
No.
So, yeah, so generally because, as we were saying, they're sold at public auction, and that's generally where the cases end, for the most part, because the orders generally say, and then the sum total given to this claimant, etc. They don't normally have any records, at least that I've found so far, that say it was this amount that this person was sold for, etc. And also, they say sometimes, especially, well, not to just for, I don't know why, but for various cases that like to be advertised in local newspapers for like several weeks, etc. I believe I've seen a couple of cases in which they have failed to be able to sell someone, and so that does kind of go back to the courts. But generally speaking, we don't know the fates of these individuals. Similarly with the newspaper ads, they have the advertisements, they don't say how the sale went, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think, a lesson that we learned with the Penn Park situation is that there is a paper trail out there. It's just an extraordinary volume of information. And Clemson University, who I didn't realize my son was there at the time, but they were a former plantation, and they've been exploring the history there. And Tom and some others connected with them on a database they created, 7,000 some names, and started to cross-reference things. So the information that they found, information that was found while Sam and others were doing the work at Penn Park, and you start to see the lines connect together. But until someone really, a large institution with a lot of money, maybe, puts together that large database,
I mean, because it's extraordinary how much information is out there and what you can begin to piece together. And that the fact that at Penn Park we made the first connection to a 6-year-old girl enslaved by the Gilmer family on a list from 1804, a chancery list. So you can do it. I'd say if you all ever want to do something, transcribing these documents, and I love it that young people can read cursive, my son. But just getting these documents to where they're accessible, you can begin to explore and read them. The volunteers at the Historical Society, I encourage that. So there's my editorial.
I was gonna add one thing, which is that genealogy is also really important. So in the places where we are able to tease out a little bit of narrative, even if you can attach one person to another person, for example, this enslaved woman Alice and her child Hannah, the closer you get to sort of the end of the Civil War, goes that 1870 census, and you look for maybe those two individuals together, right? And you can start to maybe try and find, what happened to people in the post-war period. So that's also a potential thread to continue on this research.
That was a question I had in terms of thinking through that genealogy, like making that, like you said, the next steps of indexing and having the names, and then property owners, and then places, and that ability to take those three things and combine them, then bring that opportunity for somebody coming backwards in time to say, I'm looking for somebody on this property, I do have a name, how do I connect it? You're unearthing those names, which is exactly what Sam Towler did with the Gilmer, Chancery Court suit, which is basically a family fighting over, like, what do we do with daddy's property? Which always, even though I know it and understand it, intellectually, they're property, and they're the most expensive property, but they're not treated as humans, they're treated as property. And when you look at it that way from a purely economic transactional section, then you understand, okay, these people are fighting over the fact that's the most expensive part of what daddy left behind, so to speak, and therefore we need to figure out how to deal with that. But then from our moral 21st century viewpoint, looking back at that, thinking, these are people. I mean, I guess maybe a question there for it is, in terms of looking at that, how did that impact you? Or did you look at it like, we have to find a way to, bookend and put a report together and do this, but still.
Well, maybe we just walk you through. Sure. So I think it matters also, like, position. I'm a white man with the last name Calhoun doing this research. So it impacts me different, but it is even
well,
that.
You just mentioned a Chapman in there. Yeah.
So, but as you go and read through it, it's impossible not to see the horror of it, but also not to see enslaved people resisting at every turn. Again, that was in a story. Nobody was enslaved without violence. You consistently find ways to push back. Whether it's trying to sabotage their own sale, flight, escape. So if you go to the minute books post 1850, Fugitive Slave Act, half of them are just captured, quote unquote freedom seekers, fugitive slaves who have essentially been trying to escape to freedom. And you realize when you put these works in concert with one another that this is a highly contested zone, and so the problem, you're right, through the 21st century mindset, there is that we know they're people, but they knew they were people at the same time, very clearly. And instead, there's moments in which people bring freedom suits in which people are trying to basically sue for freedom. That happens in these records, and so they do have to reckon with that in court several times. But yeah.
Sure, yeah, I'll just add to that, just seeing the potential for drawing out real human stories. The archives of Black life in the 19th century, there's no way to go into those archives without encountering extreme violence. But as Jake just mentioned, you also encounter people who are living their human lives and doing the best they can to survive, and in some ways attempting to thrive. And so trying to forefront the actual human beings that were there, the enslaved people who didn't see themselves as just someone else's property, right, but saw themselves as mothers, daughters, uncles, fathers, cousins, siblings, right, who are doing everything they can to maintain their kinship connections, to maintain their connections to particular places. And when you start to look through their lens and try to do everything you can to elevate their stories, it gives a kind of imperative to the work that's beyond just wading through these hundreds of very difficult to read court cases.
I think the space matters, places matter. And I know you guys had some questions, but it's just, you know, going back to Penn Park again, just we recently completed, you all are hearing about LiDAR and finding, you know, pyramids in the Amazon, and we did a LiDAR flyover at Penn Park, just down the road here. And it's pretty much 2/3 intact of the original Gillet plantation. And one of the families that we had talked that is descendant of slaves there turned out to be a friend of mine. So when you talk about the emotion of, you know, having a conversation like that, but people ask, well, where did my family live? What did they do? What was their life like here? And they may be buried there, but they lived here. What was that like? And we're hoping that that LiDAR indicates where they resided and lived their lives and did those things. So there's you know, this questions about the landscape in these places, and so that's the whole thing about the image that I did earlier. It's a place, it's a person, it's an experience, and if we can, you know, open those up, I don't know. That's what I hear from, you know, the people I've talked to. Where did something happen? You know, how did that happen? So, all right, Tom, sorry.
No. Gillet, did you have anything to add, or?
Oh, I mean, I just, I saw a hand up back there, so, yeah, I saw Diana's again, so I wanted to ask her what she wanted to ask before I add to anything.
Save it till afterwards,
No, go for it.
No.
I was wondering, when I was looking at Thomas Dunn and Chapman, I thought about my great-great-grandmother Dunn, and I wonder if you saw any almanacs or phone books with names of enslaved people that don't know, because I'm trying to find out where her folks are from. And also, what kinds of real estate, other than the plantation you may have seen here, was there likely a transfer of some of those enslaved people based on who won the Chancery case? Did they go to other real estate of that slave holder? Were you able to see that? Because I love following the real estate and looking at the landmarks and how modern Victoria cabins work.
So,
Then it's kind of two questions.
Yes, for sure.
I'm talking about my grandmother, and that made me think about, did you see, to ask you if you've seen any almanacs, farm books?
Yeah, so we haven't looked necessarily at farm almanacs, but in terms of the name Dunn, right now our documents are searchable, so we can definitely get your contact info and see if we can find any records that are pertinent. For the second question about like plantation to plantation like sales, those do happen in the Chancery Order Court records. And again, most large sales of enslaved persons happened like without ever the courthouse really getting involved, other than depots, etc., will books, what have you. The enslaved people never went to the courthouse in those large scale sales. It was just plantation to plantation. Those do happen, especially if it's resolved pretty clearly that one claimant is that if the judge says, okay, the son doesn't get anything, it's the widow that gets everything, then yes, then in those instances, and oftentimes it's just a changing of quote unquote like ownership, right? Like the enslaved people, which to be fair, oftentimes would coincide with enslaved people fleeing, because change in ownership was normally, I think, the number one determinant or predeterminant for an enslaved person seeking freedom, because they don't know what type of enslaver the next person is going to be, or they may know what type of the next person will be. So yeah.
Just like I read it. Certain fourth grade teachers, and I always
I'm fascinated by what you all have found down in the corner, Lady Opera House. That's fabulous. I didn't realize that was being done so well. Did you say 25,000 things?
25,000 artifacts, and those are just
Where's it gonna go?
Well, that's
in Virginia, the material culture, the artifacts that are recovered from a piece of property, and that includes broken pieces of ceramics, glass, metal artifacts, animal bone, bricks, a whole range of material culture. They are the property of the property owner. In this case, both the city and the county, I believe, jointly own the property. And one of our responsibilities will be to kickstart a discussion between the city and the county as to a proper repository for those artifacts. And in my mind, several qualifications might apply. You might want that collection to stay local or certainly in the region so that it is accessible to individuals who want to research that. You want to have a proper storage place. It can't be in a damp basement somewhere. You want to have it, perhaps, I know the county is considering a small display of material culture in the county courts complex, and we're in the process of helping them choose artifacts that might be appropriate, and perhaps provide narrative stories about the artifacts and the site. So yeah, 25,000 artifacts, and I said approximately because we are still counting. We are about 98% done the cataloging of our artifacts. Right now we're wading through the faunal collection, animal bone collection, which is extensive, and we don't have a final account on that.
So how many boxes is that?
Yeah.
I'm just delighted because it's
we
for
have,
all of us.
I think
it's
we
not
have,
just some or part. It's not
yeah.
just the enslaved people or white people, whatever it was. It's all of us and our
Absolutely.
ancestors. I'm thrilled.
It's,
Absolutely.
Jen and I, yesterday, we've talked about it a lot, and I sought a grant last year put towards developing an analysis plan and a way to inventory, but I didn't get the grant. So it's not an inexpensive project. But the whole idea of having it made available so that others can look at it, but it is that proper analysis. Now, if I really, we joked about this, but if I could do anything in the world, I would ask the the Redland Club people if we could dig up their parking lot. That's where the tavern is. And to really sort of piece it all together. Find them parking in the city garage, maybe I can arrange that, but the funds to even do that would be,
it's
expensive.
I'm not aware that the city or the county proper has repositories for these types of museum objects. But the University of Virginia does, and that is a local institution, and that would be one perhaps preferred repository. But getting back to Tom's question, and how do you feel researching and uncovering information like this? As an historical archaeologist, I straddle the world between documents, manuscripts, and the material remains of human life. And while I am very much an avid researcher, I love going to the courthouse, I love going to the library, I also love uncovering things, standing in what we believe is the remains of a kitchen structure, and absolutely knowing that in the late 18th, early 19th century, that there were enslaved African Americans, enslaved women who ran that kitchen, provided the food, etc. So there's no pun intended, there's a very material, visceral reaction to archaeology on sites that enslaved African Americans, free blacks, had a presence. And it certainly motivates me. I find very much a big gratification to discover information about material remains or about the lives of individuals and to try and put that to paper. That's one of the things that archaeologists have to do. You see these Indiana Jones movies and you find these things. That's the first part. Then you have to tell a story. You have to write about it. And that, to me, is the most compelling for me.
Ben,
Yeah.
this Ben Park so wiped and sanitized because of the golf course. That's what I wonder. has it been,
Don't think it's entirely. There,
where'd that stuff
we
go?
found, I actually found, I'm a collector of things in City Hall. I accumulate things. And I accumulated the 1991 golf course plans. So we were able to look at it closely and determine there's a lot that hasn't been touched. A little known story about that is that on the golf course plans, there are 7 locations noted as burial houses.
No.
And we, I called Dan, I called Tom, and and it turned out that's where they buried the stumps. They built the course, but
Golf engineers have a funny sense of humor.
but we think that some of the areas that are of interest have not been disturbed, and so we'll know soon enough.
You had a question, sir?
Yes. First of all, thank you very much. They're fascinating and interesting to hear about this. My question is, what is the city or county going to do to try to provide interpretive signs so that one could do their own walking tour and bring some of it out? And I bring up as an example just the city of Richmond, which has the slave trail right along the James River with some very powerful signs, and you can go do a walking tour even up to Lumpkin's jail where they had their own auction. So I'm just curious if you're aware of what's going to be done with this, just so that this can be further illuminated for the public.
I wear several hats at the city. And primarily, as I said, staff of the Board of Architectural Review, and that's probably 70–80% of my time. Getting to, my colleagues call this, oh, Jeff's doing his fun stuff. And I'm like, well, you know, I'm actually supposed to be doing this. We have a lot of discussions on the Historic Resources Committee about signs and markers, because it's, you know, you want to put a lot on there, but you're limited, and we've been working on a walking tour map, but that's been a long time coming.
One thing I would point out, I mean, a lot of what you're listening to tonight is the research to do just what you're asking.
Yeah.
But also some of that research, and I just wanted to point out, Beloved Community Tours by Beloved Seville has an online, and they're still working to roll this out completely. And if you want to talk to the lady right in front of you, she knows a little bit about it. So there are certain steps that are being taken. So Jalane and others were working with some folks on blogs and some podcasts, and then with the Memory Project too, being involved with doing this research. So it's kind of not necessarily a city or a county question, it's more of kind of a collaboration of different groups. I mean, and I was pointing out like some of our partnerships, we work closely with the city and the county, but also with the downtown Seville folks, with the community, Beloved Seville. So it's thinking through like how do we collaborate to bring these things together to tell these stories. Right. And then work with the city like Jeff through the planning office and the neighborhood development to say, we got an idea.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where a lot of this came from, through the Blue Ribbon Commission, through making these recommendations, to then thinking through that process. Because on a city and a county level, you could have some side stories about the whole Swan Tavern courthouse, what went on to make that happen. So there's a lot of red tape. So it's kind of almost, I'm not going to say go around them, but there's ways in which you can do that to tell that important story.
Right. Well, I was just I hate to bring my phone sometimes, and so it's nice to be able to go to a place and just do a nice walking tour where you can have an interpretive sign that's very informative. And again, if you haven't gone down to the slave trail in Richmond, it is fascinating.
That's great.
They're not inexpensive, and they're static. Once you put that text on there, you're sort of you're stuck with it. I mean, we had to change. We changed the sign at Daughters of Zion Cemetery when we realized there were a lot more burials there than the bronze sign had said. But I had an assistant who was a wizard at GIS and had begun linking a lot of the historic information we have. And if anybody wants to volunteer and come straight out of my office, I accept volunteers in that too. But she was putting everything linked to a parcel that then you could, click on that parcel and identify it. But she went to work for the county, so that one. So I'll see if the next assistant can do that. But it's little steps. I think that we maybe don't do a good job of letting people know the little steps we've done.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the marker, the Department of Historic Resources marker is a first step in terms of making sure that the information is there and that it is present, so somebody who is just wandering into Court Square and needing to figure out what's going on is they understand certain aspects. Which in our community, I think we've seen over the past 3 to 4 years a major shift in terms of what you would see in Court Square. You know, 4 years ago, if you walked into Court Square, you would see the At-Ready statue, you would see Jackson. And now we have other things, that's the James lynching monument, and now the other one that is gonna be there. So it's the pendulum is swinging, and it's like it's just trying to tell that whole history story and be contextually, you know, to tell it contextually so our community understands its history and grapples with it and doesn't like it or does like it, or, you know,
History.
It's history. Yeah,
Yeah, wrap it up.
Well, we're getting to the 6:40 mark, which is about 10 minutes beyond where I said I would keep you. So I think we'll just wrap it up. So thank you. Thank our Facebook folks out there, and look at our newsletter. Come back and visit us. Thank you again.